Hello, and welcome to this little presentation in Unit 1, where I'm going to talk about 4 what I call foundational points to the course. And also welcome not just to my students, but welcome to students from other sections who might be chiming in to take a look at this. This is going to be about 10 or 15 minutes. This video is a little longer than my usual videos. But I want to talk for just a few minutes about some big points that I don't think the book covers very well, and so I want to sort of fill in some gaps here. This really helps make certain that we're all on the same page about some things, and it also talks about a few things that really go beyond research methods. So I will get started. I'm going to talk first about strategic communication and our place at the university. I'm going to talk about types of research. I'll talk about the difference between theoretical and applied research, and then I'll try and make the pitch to you that research is fundamental to our field and to your career. So let's get started. So I have a very broad view of what strategic communication entails, and while my perspective is certainly a mainstream perspective, not everybody agrees with it. Some people sort these fields out in different ways. That's fine, I don't want to argue about that, but it's really important that you understand that. So you might be speaking to somebody who says, oh, I work in strategic communication, but they really might mean something different than what you mean is strategic communication. So for example, people who come from a business background might consider marketing to be strategic communication. They might consider that to be even the term that subsumes all other fields. They'll say marketing subsumes public relations and stratcom and all sorts of other fields. People in public relations might take the same position, that public relations is the overarching term, the overarching field, if you will. Another great example is the military. In the military, strategic communication, or stratcom, is really something completely different than what we call it here. It's much more akin to public relations in some cases, or in other cases it's even akin to sort of psychological operations. So I consider strategic communication to be the umbrella term, the overarching term, that includes all these other fields. And strategic communication is using strategy and planning in our communication campaigns. So perhaps the most prominent among the fields under strategic communication is public relations. But PR can include all sorts of other things, such as event planning, media relations, and publicity. There are also subfields of PR, many of which are now becoming clearly defined as subfields, such as sports PR or sports communication, entertainment PR or entertainment communication, international PR, etc., to name just a few. Then we find all kinds of fields that are taught and practiced under the framework of strategic communication. All of these are taught in schools of communication, but they're also taught elsewhere at the university. And they include marketing and advertising. Those might show up in a business school, for example. And then also social marketing under the rubric. Social marketing is applying marketing principles not to sell products, but to sell ideas for some public good. Pardon me. And then there are lots of other fields. There's health communication, which is an enormous field, and this might be taught in a school of public health. Political communication is a field that really straddles the fields of political science and communication. Public diplomacy is a government's outreach and communication to publics in other fields. It's a very important field right now. It's critical right now, a great field to get into. Lobbying is pursuing an organization's interests with policymakers. You know what that is. Media advocacy is working to get media recognition for your cause. And there are all sorts of other ones. I will move on quickly here. Here's another way to look at it. For example, in the second row here, an organization communicating to elites, we would call that lobbying. The one here that really doesn't belong to us is when a government communicates to another government. That's diplomacy, and I would put that outside of our purview. So as an academic field, strategic communication is taught across all of these areas. PR, social marketing, health, communication, advertising. You will find schools and departments in all of these things, any one of which might be teaching what we would call strategic communication. And if we're even more broad, if we think of the field of communication as a whole, then within that is mass communication, interpersonal communication, PR, journalism, strategic communication, all of these things which we might find taught in a school of communication, within which we'd find the field of strategic communication. So we have a very broad, a very large academic field. So our research methods, or the methods we will use in this class, are drawn from two broad areas. On the left side of this diagram, we have the sciences, and on the right side we have the humanities. Now under the sciences are the hard sciences and the social sciences, both of which generally use the scientific method. So on the left-hand side under the hard sciences you see chemistry, biology, etc. Okay. On the right side, on the far right side, are the humanities, and they generally use literary or historic methods. So communication is generally grouped into the social sciences, and this includes things like economics, sociology, psychology. You can see them all here. History is a field that really can be considered both a social science and a humanity. So a historian might use surveys and analyze media content to understand the past, but he or she might also take a more literary or more storytelling approach in their study of history. Communication also really does straddle these two areas. We use both the methods of social science and the methods of the humanities. So we use surveys and experiments, which come more from the social sciences, but there are many people in our field who use interviewing or very close reading of texts, methods more likely associated with the humanities. There is a distinction that we make here between quantitative and qualitative methods. Now, for some people, this distinction begins with big assumptions about how the world works and big assumptions about values. This is really a question of epistemology. Epistemology is a branch of philosophy. It's concerned with how we come to know things, how knowledge is acquired. Now, we don't really study epistemology in this class, but it's a very interesting area. We're really concerned just with the methods. Now for us, we use the qualitative and quantitative distinction just to sort things out into the two groups of methods that we will learn. So in this class, the methods we will focus on are the quantitative methods of surveys, experiments, and content analysis, all of which are used in strategic communication, although I think surveys are clearly used most frequently. The qualitative methods we will study are focus groups, observational research, field interviewing, and case studies. Among these, I think probably focus groups are the most commonly used, or is the most commonly used method. One quick note here, different fields and different businesses use different terms. Sometimes fields might use terms like field research, participant observation, or even the term ethnography. Depending on your perspective, they might be referring to similar methods. So don't be confused by the terms. You sometimes just have to investigate further. Someone will say, I'm using a lot of participant observation research. Well, that's really what we might call observational research, or even to some people ethnography. But you do need to be careful. I just don't want you to get thrown by terms if you're talking to somebody about methods. Often we're talking about the same thing. Now there are some big broad ways in which these methods generally differ. Quantitative methods usually count things and use statistics. Qualitative methods don't have anything against counting, and qualitative methods don't oppose statistics, but they usually do not use them. Another difference is the role of the researcher. In quantitative research, the quantitative researcher is separated from the data, if you will. They're interested in a notion of objectivity, that the data sort of speaks for itself. The qualitative researcher is really an integral part of the data. Think of it this way. A survey researcher reports on a survey of beliefs about Americans, and her argument is that the data represent the world. Okay? On the other hand, an anthropologist studies, let's say, the culture of China, for example. Well, in this case, the anthropologist interprets China through her eyes. You or I could go study China. We could walk along next to each other for a year studying the culture and talking to the same people using the same methods, but we both might arrive at very different ideas of what we were studying. The researcher here is an integral part of the research and understands that and accepts that and comes to grips with that. You can't separate the researcher from the research. Quantitative research often begins with hypotheses and a specific research design. In qualitative research, these things often arise during the design. So you begin a survey with a set of questions and a set of ideas that you want to study. In qualitative research, you often might begin without that set of ideas. You go in sort of open-minded, uncertain what you might find, and surprised by what you might find. Finally, qualitative research is very interested in context. Everything needs to be understood within its context. And interpretation, a rich, vibrant interpretation of what you're studying. Now, these are very big, gross distinctions, but I wanted to begin to sort of separate these two methods so you begin to think of them a little bit differently. The book is helpful in this regard, but I want to give you sort of a jump start on that. Okay, another distinction I'd like to make for you fairly quickly is the one between theoretical and applied research. Strategic communication research is often both. So, theoretical research is generally more concerned with building theories, making big, broad, abstract statements about the world. Applied research is more often concerned with answering specific questions. Now, this is important. Neither one is better than the other. It simply depends on your approach, it depends on your goals, it depends on where you work. There are some clear distinctions we can make between them that often, though not always, but often appears. So for example, theoretical research is usually public. Scholars at universities must publish their work and how they arrived at their observations. They're very open about it. That's one of the tenets of science. Applied research is often private. You can imagine why. If you study marketing for Coca-Cola and you arrive at some interesting conclusions, you don't share those conclusions with the people from Pepsi or another soft drink company. Theoretical research tends to be a bit more formal. It tends to be more concerned with theories. This is not always the case, but often. Theoretical research tends to be more analytical, whereas applied research might be more descriptive. Theoretical research appears in academic books and journals. It's conducted at universities and think tanks, whereas business is one of the main places where applied and administrative research takes place. So sometimes people will use these terms as a pejorative. We don't. To say research is theoretical is in no way a criticism, or to say that a piece of research is only applied is in no way a criticism. Answering direct questions relevant to a business certainly is something that we're interested in. Likewise, trying to arrive at big, broad theories is something we're also interested in. All right, my last point, point 4. The last thing I want to do is to convince you that research is absolutely fundamental to our field, and it is becoming more fundamental. Once in a while I have a student who argues that research is not important to what they want to do. Maybe so. That's if what you want to do is to write press releases, plan events under someone else's direction, or if you want to put together a website. If you want to do those things, then maybe research is not for you. But generally speaking, this is not what my students want to do. You want to be the one who is strategizing about a campaign. You want to be the one who is directing others to do those press releases, who is thinking about the goals of those press releases and what form it should take. You want to be the one who's planning events and building websites that serve the greater goals of an organization or a company. You want to manage. You want to be in charge. You want to help plan those goals. And to do that, you have to understand research. As our field has professionalized over the last 50 years, communication has moved into a management role. We don't take orders from others, we help make the decisions. And all professional managers in strategic communication and public relations must be able to understand and process research. So just get yourself in this mindset. You have to be able to do this in order to move up in your field. Why? Why is this so? It's because all communication campaigns begin and end with research. This is really important. Before we begin any campaign, we think about research. It's the first thing we do. We might think about who we're trying to reach, how best to reach them, what message would work best. We might do surveys to find out about our audience. We might do experiments to find out how best to communicate with our audience. We might hold focus groups to try to gauge how people will respond to a particular campaign or something like that. Now, the amount of research we do depends on the time and our budget. Good research takes time and money, and that observation is something that you should get from this class. That to do good communication campaigns takes research, and good research takes time and takes money. Now, sometimes our work needs to be done quickly, and in those cases, we rely on our intuition and our experience. We do what research we can in the time that we have. So this might just mean going online to search out something about our topic or to learn more about our audience. If we work for a small nonprofit and we have a $1,000 budget for a campaign, it makes no sense to spend $900 on research. We don't have much money for the campaign. So instead we dedicate our money to the resources for the campaign. A small campaign budget means little formal research. But on the other hand, if you have a $10 million budget, it's equally foolish to not do research. We might spend several $1,000,000 on research in this case. Inexperienced managers don't understand this. They don't understand that good research costs money, and professional PR practitioners have to take that knowledge with them into the field and convince our bosses that they need to spend to get good information. So, good telephone survey about Americans costs tens of thousands of dollars. Even a small focus group research can cost several $1,000s. The U.S. government appropriated almost $15 billion over 12 years for the 2010 census. Tens of millions of dollars were spent on dozens of surveys, literally hundreds of focus groups, and a host of other research projects. But this was necessary for the census to succeed. It was an enormous communication campaign, and I think a hugely successful one because of the research that they did. I do want to add, though, that we can do excellent research on a small budget. We can do online surveys, we can do quick focus groups, or even online focus groups. With email lists, you can do quick and cheap survey projects, all of which can be done very economically. So those of you who have some background in public relations are very familiar with these acronyms. RACE is one. This is how you run a communication campaign, through RACE. Research, Action, Communication, and Evaluation. Research is at the beginning, and research is at the end in the evaluation. Another acronym is the ROPE acronym. Again, research at the beginning and research at the end. We often call research at the beginning the benchmark research, and research at the end evaluative research. Okay, I think this is the last slide. As our field has become more professional, our research budgets have grown and research expertise has become a valued skill, but our employers are increasingly looking for us to justify our work and our budgets with research. So 30 years ago, if you worked in public relations, at the end of the year the boss would come to you and say, what did you do this year? What was your output this year? And you might say, well, I sent out 40 press releases, and they led to 5 news stories, and I wrote a dozen internal newsletters. Then your boss would say, great, fantastic, here's your raise for the year, good job. These are what we call output objectives. Increasingly, we are being asked for impact objectives. So now our bosses ask us, what was the impact of those news stories? Or what was the impact of those press releases? How was our company portrayed in those news stories? Did it matter? And those newsletters you sent out, what was their effect? Do our employees feel better informed? Do they feel more connected to the company? Is there better morale? What issues are our employees thinking about or talking about? These are impact objectives, and these are all measured with research. So at the end of the year, your boss says to you, is our brand loyalty higher? Is our public perception higher, or our public recognition? And in order to do those things requires difficult, sophisticated communication campaigns, and it requires research at the beginning to see how people think about us, and at the end to see whether or not our communication campaign succeeded or failed. As we become more professional, this is what we are being expected to do. Just putting out stuff is no longer going to be good enough in our field, and that's why you have to know research. Okay, so that's the end. I think I went on a little bit too long, but I hope it was of some help to you. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to get in touch with me. I'd love to talk more about this, and I will see you online.